Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Lajar Velazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
Day 159 of the war in Gaza. The IDF is continuing its offensive against Hamas in Khan Yunis in the south and conducted bombardments in central Gaza. Amid the ongoing war, Israel is facilitating new routes to bring humanitarian assistance to Gazan civilians. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
The IDF's 98th Division is continuing its offensive against Hamas in the Khan Yunis area of southern Gaza, in the Hamad Town residential complex, and in surrounding suburbs. The division's Egoz commando unit battled a 7-man Hamas cell that had been holed up in a building in Hamad. The troops eliminated some of the gunmen before directing an airstrike to kill the others. In one airstrike, the IDF said it eliminated a Hamas terrorist responsible for many rocket attacks on Israel, including on October 7th. The Air Force carried out strikes against Hamas sites in central Gaza's Deir al-Balach, targeting tunnels, missile launching positions, and staging grounds. Also in central Gaza, the IDF said the Nachal Brigade is continuing to battle Hamas operatives in the area. Amid the ongoing warfare, Israel is continuing efforts to facilitate aid to Gazan civilians arriving by land, air, and sea. A World Food Program convoy entered the northern Gaza Strip on a new military road. The UN agency used a new land route to deliver food directly into northern Gaza for the first time in 3 weeks, amid global pressure on Israel to allow more access to the coastal enclave. Israeli officials said it was part of an experimental pilot in order to prevent Hamas from taking over the aid. Shipments were thoroughly inspected by Israeli authorities at the Kerem Shalom border crossing before entering via the Strip's north. Meanwhile, Moroccan food supplies arrived directly at Ben Gurion Airport before being given to the Red Crescent at Kerem Shalom crossing for delivery into Gaza. Rabat's foreign ministry said in a statement that Morocco is the first country to transport humanitarian aid via this unprecedented land route. The U.S. military conducted another airdrop into northern Gaza, along with Jordan's Air Force. A U.S. C-130 dropped approximately 5,280 pounds of food, including rice, flour, pasta, and canned food. And a ship transporting almost 200 tons of food to Gaza left port in Cyprus in a pilot project to open a new sea route for aid to Gaza. The aid ship hopes to dock at a new temporary pier being built in Gaza. The charity ship, Open Arms, was seen sailing out of Larnaca port in Cyprus, towing a barge containing flour, rice, and protein. The 200-mile voyage across the eastern Mediterranean to Gaza with a heavy tow barge could take up to 2 days.
Hezbollah has fired some 100 rockets at northern Israel in one of its largest barrages since the start of the war in Gaza. There were no injuries or damage caused. The barrage came after IDF airstrikes deep into Lebanon caused considerable damage. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
The first early morning barrage of some 70 rockets was accompanied by sirens in the Golan and northern Galil. This was followed by a second barrage of another 30 rockets, ending in a total of about 100, some of which were intercepted by the Iron Dome air defense system. Sirens did not sound for the second barrage as the rockets impacted in open areas. There are no reports of injuries or damage. The heavy rocket fire came after the Israel Defense Forces carried out strikes deep in Lebanon, saying fighter jets hit a pair of sites used by Hezbollah. The airstrikes in the area of northeast Lebanon's Baalbek targets facilities belonging to Hezbollah's aerial unit. Baalbek, an area identified in the past as a Hezbollah stronghold, is nearly 100 kilometers, or 60 miles, from the Israeli border. Lebanese officials said several people were killed in the Israeli strikes. Other strikes hit near the city of Ta'araya, 20 kilometers west of Baalbek. According to an IDF statement, the strikes targeted facilities belonging to Hezbollah's air defense unit and were in response to the Lebanese terror group's recent launching of explosives laying drones toward the Golan Heights.
The war is waging on the northern front and in Gaza, but not only there. Last night, security forces thwarted a major attack intended for Tel Aviv. ILTV's Devo Klein has the latest.
On Monday night, the Israeli security forces announced that they had eliminated a Palestinian terrorist who was planning an imminent suicide bombing attack on Israeli civilians. Israeli forces from the Duvdevan unit, together with the Shin Bet, conducted the operation in the village of Zeta, close to Jenin, which has become a major terrorist stronghold. The would-be suicide bomber was identified as Muhammad Jabbar, a 34-year-old Palestinian who initially drew a weapon when IDF forces confronted him in a grocery store. He was immediately neutralized. According to Israeli intelligence, Jabbar was planning to illegally enter Israeli territory with firearms and explosives with the intent to attack Tel Aviv. Since the beginning of the year, over 250 imminent terror attacks have been thwarted by the IDF and the Shin Bet. With the start of Ramadan, Israeli security forces are on high alert as Hamas has called for terrorism in Jerusalem and other Israeli cities.
Terrorist violence today at the entrance to Jerusalem and in Jenin. In Jerusalem, 15-year-old attacker was neutralized, but not before wounding 2 Israelis. More from ILTV's William Sharon.
According to police, the terror suspect arrived at Road 60 tunnel checkpoint at the southern entrance into Jerusalem on a bicycle. Security forces attempted to question him. He drew a knife and stabbed them. 2 members of the security forces were wounded and taken to hospital with light and moderate injuries. A civilian guard at the checkpoint attempted to physically confront the stabber before IDF troops stationed in the area opened fire at him. Media reports named the attacker as Muhammad Abu Hamad, 15, from the town of El Kadal, close to the checkpoint. His condition has not been announced. The police chief arrived at the scene and spoke of security concerns during Ramadan.
ככל שהרמדאן, יום השישי של הרמדאן, מתקרב, המתח קצת עולה, אנחנו עושים כל שביכולתנו על מנת לאפשר את חופש פולחן הדת לכל המתפללים המוסלמים שיוכלו לבוא ולהתפלל ולקיים את מצוות החג בצורה סדורה ובטוחה, ונעשה כל שביכולתנו על מנת לאפשר את זה, במקביל לשמור על הביטחון של כוחותינו ואזרחי מדינת ישראל.
Meanwhile, the IDF says the troops operating in Samarian city of Jenin opened fire after identifying armed men during a raid. 2 terrorists were reportedly killed in the raid. The army says that during the operations, troops detonated several explosive devices that had been planted and uncovered weapons. 7 wanted Palestinians were arrested in raids across Judea and Samaria.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple. Joining us now with more on the security situation in Israel on the first day of Ramadan is founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch, Itamar Marcus. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we are officially now in the month of Ramadan. Israel was hoping to have a hostage deal and temporary ceasefire secured during this month, but Hamas has refused, hoping instead to sort of ignite the region over this holiday. So I want to ask you, what the word is on the Arab street. How are they viewing these developments?
Well, first of all, we have to look at what Ramadan has meant over the years in the Palestinian Authority. And the best example of what this is in terms of terror is a sermon that was given 2 years ago during Ramadan by the most important religious figure in the Palestinian Authority. He's Mahmoud al-Habash. He's Abbas's advisor on Islam. And in his sermon, he comes to the people and the Palestinian people, and he says, what did the Prophet do in Ramadan? He says, did he spend it in serenity, laziness, and sleepiness? And he says, no, he was all the great battles he fought during Ramadan. Then he talks about the Battle of Badr, which he fought in the Ramadan. He conquered Mecca during the Ramadan. And he points out, he says, the Prophet didn't say, people are thirsty, they're tired, they shouldn't fight now. No, they went in even though they were fasting. And then he comes to what all of this, how what Muhammad did is a role model for them. And then he says, Ramadan is meaning for Palestinians, what it was in the life of the Prophet, a month of jihad, conquest, and victory. That's a quote. So you've got the top religious figure telling Palestinians that this is not a time for you to sit around and be tired because you're fasting or you're thirsty. You have to go out there, conquest, jihad, victory, meaning, if we translate into our words, this is a time for terror. Go out and kill Israelis. So this is coming from the top religious figure, Mahmoud Abbas's advisor on Islam. This was 2 years ago. This has been the atmosphere doing all of the years. And now just a couple of weeks ago.
That's the question. I mean, that was 2 years ago. Now we're in the midst of a war in Gaza. Obviously, tensions are even higher. So what's happening now?
Okay, so March 1st, what he did was he made a similar kind of speech, and he said, Ramadan will revive the faith and activity in our just jihad and our legitimate goals. So again, he's talking about this again. So the Palestinian Authority, like Hamas, are all trying to encourage their people. Now, one of the reasons why it's going to be very hard for them is Israel has arrested over 4,000 terrorists in Judea and Samaria since October 7th. All of the terror infrastructures and suspected terror infrastructures that we knew about, that we were watching carefully, we decided to stop watching carefully and go in and arrest them. And that was the big change in Israeli, I would say, political approach to terror in Judea and Samaria. The approach now is any kind of a question of an organization, go out and get the people. And that's why we have, like I say, 4,000 people who we knew about primarily beforehand, and yet we were waiting, and now we stopped waiting, and we've arrested 4,000 people. Just to give you a sense of that number, before we started these arrests, we only had about 4,500 terrorists in prison. So we've almost doubled the prison population. I'm not talking about Gaza arrestees now. We've almost doubled the number of Palestinians arrested, terrorists arrested, and suspected terrorists in just the last few months. So what we did is we took away the chance of them doing something. Did we miss some people? Of course we missed people. There were probably hundreds, if not thousands, of terrorists out there who are still hiding. So I don't think there's going to be a systematic organized terror, but I fear we will definitely have attempts at terror.
And the police are, of course, on high alert for terror attacks. Thousands of police spread out across Israel and in Jerusalem. And, of course, we have to talk also about the war in Gaza this year. The IDF ready to go into Rafah, the question is, will it be able to do so during Ramadan? What kind of effect will this have on the Palestinians who are, in Judea and Samaria, who are already being incited to terror? I mean, is it possible for Israel to go into Rafah during Ramadan now, or will it further inflame the tensions in the Arab world?
I think that the greatest deterrent against Palestinian terror is for them to see that we are strong and we are confident and we are fighting and we are defeating them. Every time we back up a step because of their threats and because of their warnings, they actually take confidence in this and we have more terror. We have seen so many times when the Palestinian Authority has called for, let's say, a strike or called for a day of rage, and they said these days of rages are effective, and then they list all the times when Israel has canceled security plans because of their threats of rage. So the answer is not to give in to their threats, to be strong. There is no greater deterrent against terror than to make the other side feel that we are strong and their terror will be useless and they will be killed for nothing.
Absolutely. Itamar Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today and providing your analysis.
Thank you.
While tensions seem to be growing between Washington and Jerusalem, U.S. President Joe Biden last week gave the State of the Union address in which he once again reiterated U.S. support for Israel. On hand at the speech were also released hostages who sought to raise awareness of the remaining 134 hostages still in captivity. And joining us now is Jewish-American activist Emily Austin, who was also in attendance at the event. Emily, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me today.
So you were there at the State of the Union. Let's talk about the speech itself. I mean, what did you make of Biden's speech?
For the most part, I was very upset. It's not a secret that America is very divided right now. We're very polarized. Sitting above him, I didn't have the best hearing of what he was saying, but based on the audience's reaction, you can tell he said something against the Republicans when all the Democrats would stand up, and then vice versa. The Republicans only stood when he said, okay, I'm almost done. And the polarization was deeply upsetting. And then also right next to me was Mia Shem and her mother, who her mother was in tears the whole time and quite honestly distracted me because I couldn't stop crying watching her cry. So my attention was diverted between trying to listen to Biden and then watching Mia's mother and just having my heart broken.
And I mean, you were also there to highlight the plight of the hostages, the fact that there are still 134 hostages being held by Hamas. You know, you wore a big yellow ribbon on your dress. Was there really a sense that this issue was on the agenda and on the minds of the members of Congress and of President Biden?
The members of Congress, yes. Right before the State of the Union address began, there was a cocktail reception. All of the hostage families were in the presence. They were speaking with congressmen, senators, the Speaker of the House. They all wore yellow scarves to represent that they were the families of the hostages. So it would be very hard for me to believe that all of the attention, or a lot of it, was not on the families. However, I was personally disappointed because I feel as if the topic of Israel itself, and specifically the hostage families, was breezed over. And then you hear how emphasized the war on Russia and Ukraine was, that almost makes it feel like it was neglected when they spoke so little about Israel. So I was very disappointed because having so many families in attendance, they're waiting to hear what he's going to say about them, whether he's going to reaffirm a plan to get the hostages back, and he didn't.
And I mean, you said that you were sitting next to Mia Shem, one of the released hostages, and you said her mother was crying throughout. I mean, what can you tell us about that? Why was she crying?
I'm sure it was emotional to see so many families in the balcony. Of course, I can't speak on her behalf, but there are so many families suffering the same fate that she did. Now, Mia was one of the lucky ones to get to return home, but I'm sure being there in the presence of so many families who are suffering as well can't be easy on a mother. I'm not even a mother, and I can't imagine if something like that happened to me one day. And I think it was just an emotional scene. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if she was upset by the fact that it was very much breezed over. I think it was just, an overwhelming room. There was an overwhelming amount of support, not only from the people who attended, from the congressmen, but overall, it was a very emotional night. I mean, personally, I was choked up beginning to end. I couldn't even speak.
And, you said there was a lot of support, but we also saw many anti-Israel voices in the crowd, most notably the Squad. I mean, how notable was their presence during this event?
Being completely honest, their presence was unseen and unheard. There was so much support amongst, like I said, the congressmen for the hostages to return home. There were congressmen with the sticker counting how many days there were remaining, how many days that the hostages are in Gaza. There was a full crowd standing ovation. I did not see the Squad specifically, so I can't confirm or deny that they stood, but almost the entire audience stood up when Biden did address his short mention of the hostages. So I did not feel or see their presence. I think that the State of the Union deliberately didn't address a lot of important matters, and therefore it was just kind of all over the place. So I didn't feel the Squad's presence, the Hamas caucus's presence.
So, Emily, here in Israel and, of course, among the Jewish community around the world, October 7th and the ongoing war are a major issue of major concern. But, as a young American Jewish activist, I'm interested to hear from you how the young generation in the United States views the issue of the hostages. We've heard many, conflicting polls, but I want to hear from you. If you can maybe give us sort of some insight into how the young American, youth view this issue.
Gen Z and below have been absolutely poisoned by TikTok, and this is a conversation you and I had when it came to Iran a couple of months ago. But the truth is, something as small, not as small as TikTok, but as unreliable as social media is brainwashing the youth. So they are all led to believe that Israel is the villain, Israel is the modern day Nazi, and without doing any due diligence or homework, they're so quick to believe it. And we're not doing enough of an initiative to try to change the minds. There aren't enough loud voices out there that are debating and engaging with these people. And quite honestly, they don't want to be educated. They are set in their ways. They're very uninformed. They're very ill-willed. Everything they do is about attention and trying to be social justice warriors, but they have selective outreach. For example, you will always hear ceasefire now, but you will not hear release the hostages. Why can't you call for a ceasefire and at the same time also demand the hostages return home? But they've desensitized themselves to all matters pertaining to Israel because we, the Israelis, have been painted as the modern day villains, and no one's trying to debunk that narrative.
All right, well, that's unfortunate. Emily Austin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
I appreciate it.
Israel's Minister for the Advancement of Women's Rights, Mai Golan, is leading an official delegation of Israeli women to the United Nations to mark International Women's Day. Golan is set to speak on Monday and address Hamas's systemic rape and sexual violence against Israeli women and the hostages. She will also be present at the UN Security Council meeting requested by the US, the UK, and France to discuss the sexual atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. Last week, the UN released a report confirming that Hamas has committed mass rape on October 7th, 5 months after the fact. Israel has accused the UN of seeking to downplay the findings of the report. Ahead of the meeting, Golan said she intends to represent all Israeli women alongside representatives of the world's countries and hopes to ensure that the silenced voices of Israeli and Jewish women who were raped, slaughtered, and kidnapped are heard. And last night marked one of the biggest nights in Hollywood, the Oscars, and as celebrities walked down the red carpet, what was most noticeable was not their fancy evening gowns and tuxedos, but rather their silence. Silence on the hostages, which in itself spoke volumes. And joining me now with more on Hollywood's big night is ILTV's Devo Klein. Devo, so we saw a star-studded event, many people watching from home from around the world. Nobody said a word.
Right. I think that one of the reasons that we even hold the Oscars to this type of standard is because we just had the Grammys, where we had artists like Montana Tucker sporting this big yellow ribbon and just being so vocal. We had a tribute to the those who were murdered in the Nova Music Festival. And we've seen this from Hollywood, and the Oscars just couldn't follow up. It's such a big event, and they couldn't spare even a minute to mention the 134 hostages that have been captive and are still captive in Gaza. It's so heartbreaking.
But we did have a director, renouncing his Jewishness or some nonsense like that. We didn't see any yellow pins, but we did see plenty of red hand pins distributed by the group Artists for Ceasefire. These pins actually represent a very sort of horrific, they have horrific symbolism. I mean, what can you tell us about the origins of this symbol?
Right. So the pins are, it's so tragic, the fact that artists can't see this. If they can, I have nothing to say, but a lot of them don't know that the symbolism of the red bloody hand, it comes from the Ramallah lynch in 2000, where 2 Israeli soldiers by mistake made a wrong turn into Ramallah. When they were detained by authorities there, a mob heard of the story. They came into the police station and they brutally massacred and mutilated their bodies. And the sign of the bloody hand, it's something that I don't think that Western culture really grasps. It's something that is it's very violent, and it's resistance, and it's revenge, and it's horrible, honestly.
And essentially, it represents the murder of Jews, of
Correct.
Israelis. And I really have to ask, do all those wearing the red pin at the Oscars, do they even know, what it truly means? And if not, now that they do, and I'm sure they'll hear about it, will they apologize for it? Probably not.
Probably not, but I sure hope so.
All right, Devo, thank you so much for the update. Hollywood has been hijacked by pro-Hamas sympathizers, and the rest of Hollywood simply chooses to remain silent when it comes to the hostages. When Boko Haram kidnapped the girls, every celebrity from Michelle Obama to Emma Watson raced to post a photo with, the sign that called to bring our girls back home. But when Israeli women are kidnapped by Hamas, who share the same ideology, absolute silence. And silence, as we know, only encourages evil to spread, so how shameful for Hollywood to be complicit in this. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. Stay safe and see you next week.